Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, the show where we chat about all things diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. Every week this last, well, I'm not sure if we're doing okay. It is telling me that we are having a wee bit of trouble streaming. So I'm going to end the broadcast and I'm going to have us try again, Trudy. And maybe people saw us for this
2 seconds.
time.
Okay. It says we're live, but on our side.
Well, you know what? Let's just give it a whirl. And if we need to re-record, we'll do that. So
agility, it is paramount.
actually, I think that was really, really perfect for what we're about to talk about. Trudy and I have known each other for a couple of years, and our paths just keep crossing. She's one of the people that I respect so much in the diversity, inclusion, and leadership space. Many of you have probably been familiar with her work. Trudy, I never do justice to your introduction, so I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself.
Oh, you are too kind, Maureen. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Trudy Bourgeois. I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Workforce Excellence. We are a global leadership development organization, really passionate about building inclusive leaders, inclusive cultures to advance better business results. I'm a former senior sales marketing executive and been an entrepreneur for almost 20 years. I can hardly believe it. So that's a little bit about me.
Isn't that amazing how time flies?
Yes.
Well, I think that's actually, thinking about the work that you've been doing for 20 years and the lack of progress that we're seeing. So, and that's really the basis of our conversation. Why have we stalled? Why have diversity and inclusion efforts? There's a lot, it's sort of like a lot of talk, no action. What do you think's at the root of that?
So I might say something that may offend some people, but my truth, what I believe, is that we started incorrectly. The initiative itself started incorrectly. Number one, white men never saw themselves as a part of the equation, right? So we took brown and black people and women, and we put them in rooms and said, okay, we're going to give you some, angel dust and make you perfect. And then we stuck them right back into the cultures, which also were never a part of the strategy. And so consequently, we did a little bit more harm than good, to be honest with you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've given rhetoric to what this initiative is all about. There's not an organization on the face of the planet that would say this is not a business imperative, right? But Maureen, you and I both know if it's a business imperative, the CEO owns it. Okay, there's board governance. If it's a business imperative, it's a top 5 priority. And I would just humbly submit that this talk about it being a business imperative is just not, it's just that, it's talk. It's not strategy.
It's interesting, and I'll post this. We actually did a CEO survey last fall, and it was interesting because we called it the knowing doing gap, where they were all saying, absolutely, this is important. I believe the business case for it, and genuinely, right? Like there was this then cognitive dissonance in they didn't have folks who were responsible. There wasn't a budget, and it wasn't a top 5, right? So it's that, like, yeah, I believe it to be true. Well, that's great. Like I really believe I want to be healthy and fit, but believing it doesn't get me there. I still have to do the sit-ups.
You need some action, right?
Yeah, I think so and I don't want to lose that first point that you made, that it was like we were trying to fix people versus fix systems.
Right.
So let's actually finish this thought about CEO, budget, accountability. I found it really interesting, Trudy, that when you ask people like, what are your goals, what are your metrics, you're like, no, we can't have that. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You have it for sales, you have it for quality, you
right.
have it for profitability. It's like people don't see it as if you're not truly seeing it as a business driver, nothing's
Right.
going to change.
Well, and you know what we've found, we do a lot of work with the Executive Leadership Council, and we had a conference last year for CEOs called Game Changers. It was all specifically focusing on advancing Black leaders. But one of the things that we've discovered is the general counselors have not been folded into the mix. And
Mm,
so there's a huge level of pushback of we can't set goals or we can't do this. And that's because, see, we're not looking at it, from a business imperative perspective. We're looking at, let's get a chief diversity officer so we can say we check that box.
yep.
And the truth of the matter is that the chief diversity officer and the chief human resource officer in many cases are not integrated, right?
Yep.
And then, of course, you talked about accountability, but we haven't really, in most organizations, inclusive leadership has not been defined and they haven't trained for it. So how can you even hold me accountable for something that I don't understand? I said to a CEO recently, look, if you wanted to raise the financial acumen of your organization, you would have a strategy. You would have a plan, you'd have milestones, you'd have measurements, you'd have course corrections.
Hmm.
You would not stop until you saw progress. And you wouldn't be satisfied with this, oh, we're making some directional progress. It's just a little bit more difficult than we thought. I think that's crap.
I agree, right? No, and it is. There's that's the lip service, or we're going to sponsor the Pride Parade,
Yeah,
or we're going to have this, once a year event. That does not change, and I think that actually gets us to the first point that you brought up. That we were trying to fix people from underrepresented groups
right.
versus really understanding what diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging are, and then fixing systems
That's right.
so that everybody can thrive versus a small set of the system being set up for a small group of people to thrive.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's almost like we have to hit the reset button, right? Because right now we're having to go back and try and convince people who think that they're not included that they are. And that's because when we first, the effort started, diversity was thought of as black, white, male, female.
Yep.
Right. So the broad definition wasn't configured in my mind and in my heart correctly. Then we were not touching the truth. We were not having courageous conversations. What do I mean? Okay, white women have been the biggest beneficiary of affirmative action.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
But we weren't having those kinds of conversations.
Yep.
So consequently, you got frustration building in a lot of pockets. And until you address the systems and the culture, then all you do is swirl. And that's why I think we haven't made the progress that we need to and can.
Well, and I think, and then that's leading to frustration, not just with the people who are impacted the most, right? People from underrepresented groups, but then with leaders who are saying, well, we're not making any progress.
Right.
Like it's just not even worth it.
Right. Right. It seems like the mountain is too tall, right? And I tell you, from my own research and writings, the thing that will be a breakthrough is when people personalize this.
Yeah.
But you cannot, in my opinion, advocate for inclusion when you don't know what exclusion feels like,
Feels like. Yep.
right? You can't do it. And so when we're working with senior leaders and others, we try and get them to a place of personalizing this, taking the head and then dropping it into the heart so that we can be motivated to do something differently. Because if you're not in pain, well, your life is great. Seriously, like why would I want to slow down and pay attention to this?
Well, and it's interesting, Trudy, because we'll sometimes do an exercise, and I think it's a great thing for anybody watching this to think about. We have all had a moment in time when we felt like we weren't supposed to be in a room.
That's
We
right.
felt like we didn't belong, and that could be all the way back to,
Childhood.
fifth grade when you weren't invited to that birthday
Mhm.
party too. And then and really sit with that and feel that, which I know you do a great job getting leaders and organizations to do. but then imagine there are literally people every day showing up to your workplaces who are feeling like that. Do you
Yeah.
think you're getting their best and brightest?
No, of course.
So much talent that's being left on the table.
Yeah. But you know what, Maureen, I love what you're saying because we do take people back to a time of rejection, right? So
Mhm.
they may not know exclusion in the way that a person of color would know exclusion,
Yep.
but every human being knows the pain of rejection. And then the other thing that we find is when we start talking about daughters or sons and what's going to happen in the future, then people are like, oh, well, I would want my son or daughter to be in a place where they could belong. So then you can, invite the leader to say, well, do you want to be a part of the equation of changing things? But until we, really touch the truth,
Mhm.
admit that the systems are still very broken. I don't know. I think we'll continue to make the slow progress, which just irritates me.
Well, we don't have time. We don't have time for slow progress. I think there's a part of this that I want to make that I don't think we've talked about on this series yet, and like that I've heard people get really pissed off when somebody's like, "Well, I get it now because I have a daughter." They're like, "You didn't care before." I'm like, "I don't care what got them to the table. Why do you care what got them to the
Right,
table? As long as they're at the table."
that's
And
right.
then the second thing is we do the data and the research shows us that if we're just focused on white women, it's actually at the harm of, in particular, women of color.
Absolutely.
And so maybe you are a white guy and your daughter got you to the table, but you
Hmm.
cannot just create for your daughter. You have to create across the gender spectrum for one.
Right.
And then, whether it's a woman with a disability, a woman of color, a woman who's not a cisgender, like all of those things, you have to
Mhm.
really look at intersectionality,
Yes.
or we're just perpetuating, we're making the system better for
A segment.
a segment.
That's right. That's right. I grew up in the Deep South. I grew up in segregation and was a part of desegregation. So my whole journey around equality, the dream chose me. I didn't choose it. And I had a special needs son and realized, oh gosh, there's more inequities in the world than I understood. Then my daughter, our second child, married someone not from her race, and now I fight for my biracial granddaughter,
Yep.
and I share all that because we have to look at it holistically,
Yes.
right? If we don't look at it holistically, we're gonna leave somebody out,
Yeah.
and that would be tragic if we do that.
Well, and I think that's we always talk about curiosity and the power of questions. It's who else should be included here?
That's right.
What perspective am I not thinking that? And I, you could use a checklist if you want to, right? Like,
Mhm.
are we considering class right now? And I
Yep.
think that's one that's left out quite a bit. Are we considering people with disabilities, LGBTQ, religion,
Religion.
any
Mhm.
number of things? Because that I love showing there's a photo of some of the team that took a picture of the black hole,
Ah,
right? Over 200 scientists, 5 continents, I can't, like 16 countries.
wow.
And when you look at that picture, there's age, there's race, there's gender spectrum. There is, you can't tell from the picture, but one of the lead scientists is a man who's out in science. He's part of the LGBTQ community. There's cognitive diversity
Of
there.
course.
So I think that's the other piece of this is, oh my gosh, when we get this right, we can do such cool things.
But see, okay, so what's interesting about that is that intellectually we know that.
Yeah,
The facts are there. If it were just for the data, we'd be done. You and I wouldn't even be having this conversation today, right?
right.
And so what senior executive would know that his or her profit could increase, her performance could increase, their innovation could increase? Who wouldn't sign up for that? But there is fear that is paralyzing us.
Yeah.
And we're so afraid to step in the poop and to get messy. We don't want to talk about race, right?
Yep.
You talk about the intersectionality. We don't want to go there, but
Which, by the way, you've got a great book, right? That
yeah.
and I give me the exact title so people can look it up, and I'll put a link to it too.
Thank you. It's Equality, Courageous Conversations About Women, Men, and Race
Yep.
to Spark a D&I Breakthrough. And I think what we have to admit is that corporate America is nothing more than a reflection of society.
Mm.
Look at what's happening in society. Look at the polarization that exists, particularly in North America, but you've got pockets all around the globe. And so we've got to hold up the mirror and be honest with ourselves. Otherwise, I don't think that you're going to see organizations do what I think that they really can do, which is to be a part of the societal solutions, right? I mean, that's where when I say let's hit the reset button, you look at companies like Procter and Gamble, who's using their gigantic advertising budgets to put together small films to influence the way people perceive each other across different cultures and
Yeah.
across race. I mean, where are the leaders? Where are the CEOs who their consumers are in the community? Right? And so we've got to marry both the community and the business world together if we're really going to have an impact, because where do people spend the vast majority of their time? At work.
Well, and you do a good job helping organizations actually have those courageous conversations.
Mhm.
I do think, like, even if we just go back to the measurement piece,
Yeah,
like that's when people are like, oh, we can't measure. It's like, well, why the hell not?
right,
Until we measure it, you can't you measure what matters. So of course
right.
you have to measure this.
Yes, of course. But the fear that okay, once I start measuring, I'm going to see how bad I am. See,
Right.
because I've lured myself into thinking that I'm making lots of great progress because I've done so well on women, which translates into white women, going back to what you said
Yep.
before.
Yep.
But when I really look at the underbelly and I start cutting the data, one senior executive said when she actually had her team disaggregate the data, she said, "Oh my gosh, we look like a racist company." And I said, "Well, tell me why you're saying that." And she said, "When I disaggregated the data, when I sliced it and sliced it and sliced it, I could no longer pretend that I had made all this progress
Right.
because the representation just wasn't there."
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they're like, particularly uh, when you start to slice and dice, right? When you
Mhm.
think about the fact that um, we know that at least 20% of the US population, probably closer to 25, have some sort of disability.
That's right.
There's
That's
no way we're representative on that. There's
no.
no way. So I think it is, I think there's a piece that goes back to too, like, do you really believe the business results, or do you just think that this is something that's soft?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so I think it's really digging in on that too, which is pretty common sense when you think about, like, of course you'd want all these different experiences to build the best product or service. They're just going to see things a different way. They're going to bring a different set of skills, beliefs, behaviors, experiences, ways of looking at things that's
Yeah.
stronger.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep, yep. All of it makes such logical sense. But here's the deal. We're not in a space of logic. We're doing heart work.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
We're doing soul work. We're doing beliefs, right? When you start thinking about how you were raised, often in our classes, we'll say, how many of you have heard loved ones use disparaging language to describe people across differences? And I'm like, okay, the whole room, everybody's hand should be going up, right?
Right.
Because that's why it is so unconscious, because it's so deep that you're not even aware that it shapes the way that you see others.
Right.
And so that means now I got to deal with grandma or grandpa, use some bad language. I got to really face a lot of stuff. And so I think the other piece that we really need to wrap our head around, particularly in the US, is just integration of history.
Mm.
We don't want to look at history. We don't want to look at history. See,
Yeah,
let's just get beyond that. Aren't we beyond that? No, we are not.
we're right in it.
Yes. And if we're not really careful, we're going to be like right in it 50 years ago in it
Yeah,
kind of experience. So, great leaders know, and I mean, Jim Collins' book is still a New York Times bestseller. And one of the points that he makes about great companies and great leaders is that they touch the brutal facts, right?
absolutely. Yep.
So until you, as a senior executive, you say to your team, I want the brutal facts. I want it as raw as it can be.
Yep.
Uh, until you take that step, you're always sort of, pretending, and if you get a little award from somebody, you're like, oh, look at this. But then when you lift up the hood, like,
Right.
people are broken and don't feel like they belong. And consequently, as you know, the data says they're not engaged.
Right. So what if you had to just pick three things that a leader could do? What
Mm-hmm.
would those three things be, Trudy?
Well, the first thing is to personalize this, to
Yep.
integrate it as a part of your own leadership agenda. It
Yep.
has to be personal. It's got to be a top five. I don't care, I'm not trying to let anybody else off the hook, and I'm not suggesting that senior executives don't have their responsibility, but every one of us has to lead from where we are.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to get into the game.
Yep.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that we've got to give ourselves permission to get messy and be uncomfortable, and all that stuff that we talk about. But this is messy stuff. That's why nobody wants to deal with it, right?
It is hard. And Trudy, this is the work that you and I do. And I will tell you, I have an epiphany almost every week.
Me too.
Something that I've said or something that I've done or a different way of behaving. And there was a leader, oh my gosh, I'm actually going to forget which company. And out of Arterra Wines in Canada.
Uh-huh.
And I came in and did an unconscious bias session, and he looked at his team afterward and he said, "Is this not the coolest leadership opportunity ever?"
Wow.
And he said, "We have this opportunity to grow and to think and to stretch ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if so it's messy and it's hard, but if we see that as this really cool opportunity, that's a different
Yeah.
frame it too."
Right. Right.
I so appreciated that. He's the only leader that came at it with just that, wow, this is going to be hard and it's going to be really cool.
But imagine the impact, which is the third thing,
There we go.
okay, in the three things is really after you personalize it, after you do your own work for learning and you get dirty and you get messy, right? Then you start thinking about, okay, here is the honest truth. All of our careers are going to come to an end, and nobody's going to remember how many widgets we sold. They're not going to remember how many vans were filled with whatever product, but everybody is going to remember how you treated them, the impact that you can have upon another person's life.
Yeah.
Just imagine that kind of power and responsibility and privilege to actually have a positive impact upon somebody else's life. I mean, wow, that's big stuff.
And then the ripple effect of
Oh,
that.
yes. Oh, yes. I sit here before you, and your audience, even though I was born in segregation, my parents didn't have a lot of resources with 10 kids. I had a white couple. There were only two families that I could go into their homes because of my skin color. And one family was the Donaghy's. And the Donaghy's were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
They took it personally. Like inequities became a big deal. Did they have to do it? No, their life was comfortable, but they made it personal. And then what they did was they took a risk by getting messy. Back in those days, if white people were caught with black people, they were beaten up, right? And so they're like, no, we need to expose this wart, right? And then the last thing that they did was they breathed possibility thinking into me as a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
What you've
how
done.
cool is that?
You've done. Right. Yeah. So that's, I want to leave us with that story, Trudy, because it's so beautiful. Like if you just think about that couple, what they did and the impact that you're having in the world is a perfect example of why all of this is worth it.
That's right. And all of us can be a part of it.
Oh, we have to be.
That's
So
exactly right.
thank you so much, Trudy.
Oh, you're so welcome.
If you all are not following Trudy, whether it's on LinkedIn or other social platforms, do it. She's always posting great stuff.
Thank you.
When we're able to be at events again, if you have the opportunity to see Trudy, to be a part of either just a keynote that she's giving or a workshop, I highly encourage you to do it. Her
Thank
stuff
you.
is so good. We just keep finding ways to collaborate. And Trudy, I just appreciate you and everything that you do in the world and how you are really helping to build everyday inclusion and belonging. So thank you.
Same to you, Maureen. Thank you very much for all your work and dedication. Much love.